is Katia Tynan. I'm with the City of Vancouver in our resilience team. I'm going to speak first for a couple minutes about the background in this project, and then I'm going to give the floor over to my colleagues Leslie and Tamsin to speak further. So just to start out, recapping what Allison said, this came as a funded opportunity in 2018 for the City of Vancouver to work with CUSP and social capital strategies on sort of figuring out what would a version of Boston's Greennovate Leaders program look like here, and how can we make sure that that program is able to be scaled to cities across Canada if that opportunity arises. So two of the things that I think really resonated with us in looking at Boston's program was one, the ability that it has to build foundational awareness of climate change and inspire people to act at the community scale. And the second part of that was Boston's focus on systemically excluded and underrepresented groups. So reaching them through trusted, well-networked community leaders, and ultimately focusing on engaging with people who are the most impacted by climate change, but who are also often the least responsible for it. So in terms of our funding and our targets, the City of Vancouver contributed a grand total of $10,000 in cash, as well as in-kind staff time to this process. And CUSP and social capital strategies have done a diligent job of finding $150,000 in grants to support this work. We set out with the intention again of really modeling and learning from Boston. Boston trained 143 community leaders and who went on to involve more than 1,400 community members in this work. Because of COVID, we've had to scale this back a little bit, to be honest, both in terms of our city resources, but also just in terms of community capacity right now in the middle of the pandemic. So we're focusing more on 40 community leaders and hoping to reach 500 community members through this process in this pilot. Now, in terms of the gaps and the needs that we were trying to fulfill through this work, Vancouver is no stranger to community-facing programs. We have both ones that are kind of owned, operated, and led by the city, so the Resilient Neighborhoods program being one of them, as well as ones that are led by community partners. So Green Block is operated by Evergreen. We wanted to kind of learn from these different styles of programs and figure out what are the gaps that still exist, what are the things that we still need to kind of play with and tweak. So after doing this jurisdictional scan, we knew that the public was really craving information, education, and guidance around climate change and climate action. So climate change in terms of the science, what's going to happen in Vancouver, or what is happening in Vancouver, as well as climate action being kind of the spectrum across mitigation, adaptation, resilience, preparedness, etc. The other thing that was kind of an ongoing gap for Vancouver is developing engagement materials specifically with and for equity-seeking communities and hard-to-reach groups on climate action. So recognizing a lot of our engagement at the city is quite broad, quite generic, and we needed some materials that were more tailored to specific groups that would allow them not only to kind of learn the material, so like thinking of translation, for example, but also really thinking of what are the things that different groups need to know, and what are the different actions that different kinds of communities might be able to take. Now, this sort of led to our goals for this pilot. The first one being that we wanted to do a pilot working with cohort leaders, so local leaders, and build their capacity to, I'm sorry, my screen keeps jumping in and out of slideshare mode. Oh, okay. Sorry, one moment. There's some technical difficulties here. Okay, so is anyone else seeing that happen, or is that just on my end?
It is jumping back and forth, yeah.
Okay, if it's all right, if you can still see it, I'm just gonna go forward with it in this share mode instead.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so we wanted to run this pilot with a cohort of leaders and specifically look at what does it look like to combine mitigation, adaptation, preparedness, resilience around climate change in Vancouver. How can we align these pieces that internally at the city are often painfully siloed? And how can we bring them together, at least for this community serving purpose, to make sure that when we talk about climate change, we are talking about the full spectrum of these aspects of it. In addition to that, we really wanted to build that kind of foundational awareness, the sort of climate change 101 for communities in, okay, there we go. Build this climate change kind of 101 in Vancouver to ensure that community members were actually able to lead actions on their own, informed by this information that we were providing, but really figure out what does that mean for this community and what can we do about it? And what are the trusted networks and relationships that we have to be able to advance this? We also wanted to work on this concept of kind of co-creating and tailoring this material. So recognizing, again, there's no one size fits all, but that we actually need to design with the people that we're hoping are going to be leaders in mind, and to engage those equity seeking and underrepresented groups specifically in the design process. And last, but certainly not least, I think a goal and a benefit of this process is really looking at what does a bottom-up approach to climate action look like that is still partnered with the city. So, you know, the city doesn't always need to lead. Community actually is leading and needs to lead in the future. And so how do we make sure that they have the tools and the resources that they need to be able to do that? And then how can we learn from what they're taking on, the actions that they're conducting? How do we monitor what are the asks that are coming up? And this kind of fits into sort of a spectrum of actions that we think about at the city. So some people don't actually want to attend workshops and be there for kind of in person, although that's challenging right now, and take on kind of big community actions. Some people are probably only going to get to the area of like signing up for a newsletter, following the city on social media, you know, reading news articles about climate change. But there are some people who actually really do want to take action. They really want to be involved. They want to lead. And so we need to have engagement opportunities that are across the spectrum, from both that sort of low commitment side to also the high commitment and engagement side. And we need to recognize that there are public touch points across all of this that have relevance to different departments. So again, thinking of, you know, our sustainability group does a ton of work on mitigation and adaptation. We also have our emergency management agency, which does a ton of work on preparedness and overall kind of resilience, not just to climate change. These things are all connected. So how can we bring those dots together, again, for this public-facing program, and make sure that there's sort of entry points across that spectrum for people to want to engage? And with that, I will give it over. I think, Leslie, you're going next. Just tell me next slide and I'll move it along for you.
Okay, thanks, Katia. So what is in the Climate Leaders Toolkit? So it's actually comprised of a number of different materials. So and they're meant to be customizable. All of these materials are to support the dialogues that these leaders will be guided through. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Where's the doorbell? And so including a slide deck and facilitation guide, etc. I'll talk a little bit more about those materials in a later slide. But the leaders will be trained and guided to lead dialogues on subjects such as the causes of climate change and its impacts, and some of the key strategies and actions that the city is taking, as well as actions that they could be taking. And it also guides the leaders to have conversations with their small groups to help people also develop a personal action plan. And so we try to connect residents to the relevant actions that we have related to the policies that are being developed, and to get them to create their own action plan. So next slide, please. So in phase 1 of the research and design, which we really started right at the height of COVID, and so it was a bit of a challenge, and we tried to pare down who it is that really still had energy and capacity to be interviewed and to work with us. So we interviewed about 35 participants that were either new Canadians or youth groups, so preteen and teen, BIPOC community and environmental groups and community center associations. So there was a kind of a good spectrum of interviewees. And what was surprising was, despite the pandemic, all of these interviewees still were eager to participate, because they really saw that the health, economic, and equity and climate crisis were all interrelated, and we needed action. We couldn't just pause the climate action just because there was this pandemic. So that was really great, and we were able to interview 35 participants who helped shape the toolkit. So next slide, please. So in the toolkit, as I said, there was a number of different materials that help support the leaders in facilitating a dialogue. So there's a facilitation guide. There's a slide deck that's very customizable. So depending on the topics that the leaders wanted to dive into, they could customize the slide deck to focus only on that subject area, or to go through the whole suite of topics. And then there's also supplementary material that can be added for specific groups if we wanted to dive into more of like an equity kind of focus and whatnot. So the slide deck, as well as a climate action guide, is included, and the climate action guide is divided into what is sort of more personal kind of actions, then community level actions, and then collective actions. So those are ones that are kind of aiming for more broader systemic change. So it's divided into these 3 different levels of action, which is great, so that people can really see what it is, the different scales of actions that they can be taking. And then also included is a template for them to create their own climate action work plan, and then some of the other supporting documents just with more information. So yeah, I'll go to the next slide. And so that was phase 2, and we've just been sort of wrapping that up with some final edits. And then we'll be entering phase 3 shortly, where we'll be testing the toolkit with our interviewees, and then starting to aim for recruitment for our first cohort of climate leaders later in this spring, with hopefully the actual cohort training and the conversations happening through the summer, and then an evaluation in the fall. So with that, I will pass this on to Tamsin.
Thanks, Leslie and Katia, and I'll introduce myself later. Keep going with the lessons learned so far. So we continue to learn many lessons in this project, and I think given the timing of it and what was happening in the organization, we would all 3 of us say that it's been a challenging and a good learning experience. So in terms of community, organizational, and sort of content or thematic, the lessons learned so far is that offering an honorarium is a really important gesture, of course, and it enables participation from diverse groups. So we're making sure that we have funding moving forward for honorariums and stipends. Providing opportunities for networking and professional development was identified by interviewees as being an important part of participating in these dialogues. Organizationally, we certainly should and could have really involved a champion at the executive level. I think this is a lesson that we all know and often do, but I think we needed sort of improved buy-in. The Climate Emergency Action Plan process occurred after we'd started this project, and so there was a real lack of capacity within the department to really support engaging on that piece. Thematically, I think Leslie and Katia have both highlighted the fact that we really have learned and promoted the integration of climate action, resilience, as well as preparedness. And so really bringing together emergency management and all the tools they have and volunteers on preparedness, et cetera, with climate action and resilience. So bringing these together, I don't think that people differentiate often between these, and they all work together really well. Another lesson is, or something that we're piloting, is working with social capital strategies. So an external organization to help us host the dialogues, so we can use a consistent online platform and help with administrative support as well, just to see how that works, to get a sense of the resources needed for this program moving forward. We're also looking at and exploring relationship with the community center associations. So these are the groups that are community centers where we have resilience hubs, and that could be a good partnership moving forward to involve as well. So next slide, please, Katia. So next steps, I think Leslie just went over this, but we're finalizing the toolkit materials right now. We're adding a bit more from the SEAT outcomes, the Climate Emergency Action Plan. And then there'll be a test with the interviewees. So those that were interviewed at the outset will have an opportunity to review the toolkit and provide feedback, either written or through a Zoom online medium. And then we'll be advertising the opportunity and taking applications for that first cohort, and then training the leaders and attending all the dialogues. So somebody from the city will attend each of the dialogues. I think this is important to be able to answer questions. Oh, great, doorbell and now phone. Yeah, to attend the dialogues, because I think there's an opportunity to answer questions or find the answers, as well as to understand what the dialogue is about, to better navigate and better sort of create actions that are the best. So and then in the fall there'll be the evaluation. Next slide. I think that's it for us. Thank you.